from the New England Fishery Management Council is Jonathan Peros. Jonathan has been the lead staffer for the Scala Plan for the New England Council for 10 years, 8 years, seems like 10. Um, and I'd say there's probably nobody in the room that really knows more about the inner workings of the scallop fishery as a whole. Jonathan is involved pretty much in every process. And so um, we're going to, again, have a little bit of time for questions after this. So, Jonathan, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Travis. I think I get a shirt like yours with a logo when I hit 10 years on the plan. Uh, so the presentation I want to kind of go through in four parts. We'll do like a little schoolhouse rock of what is the council process, talk a little bit about landings and stability in this fishery and what that might mean to different people. I'll spend a few minutes really focusing on pathways forward for this enhancement topic in different ways that folks in this room might be able to advance ideas that are discussed over the past couple of days. I'm going to hand it back over to Travis, who's going to go through a pretty specific timeline of what that might look like. So hopefully by the time we end here, you'll have at least a couple ideas of where the council thinks it's going to head. I appreciated Dana's comment yesterday about how much work is ongoing in Maine and in other states. And I think it's something else to think about where the federal process that I talk about could be aligned and where there's collaboration between those state waters efforts and in federal management. So to get into it, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation Management Act, it's the primary law governing fisheries in the United States. Key objectives there are to prevent overfishing. We're thinking about rebuilding any overfished stocks. Goals to increase the long-term economic and social benefits for the nation. One key feature of the Magnuson Act is it recognizes regional differences in fisheries and how they might be managed. And so the act itself creates 8 different regional councils. I work at the New England Council. Councils are charged with establishing fishery management plans. Those are FMPs for the conservation and management of a particular stock. Within that process, one of the main things we do are set allocations or quotas. You can place limits on the number of participants in the fisheries. There's a lot of different things that go into an individual fishery management plan, and it's going to vary by species and by FMP. So in New England, the New England Council is made up of the regional states, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. The New England Council has jurisdiction over the management of Atlantic sea scallops in federal waters, so 3 miles out to 200 nautical miles. There's 18 different voting members on the council that are comprised of state representatives, at-large seats. We've got several of them in the audience today. And then within that council system, there's a subcommittee, or as we just call it, a committee, that focuses specifically on the management of sea scallops. So there are committee members that are charged with developing changes to that plan. We have an advisory panel, two members, Brady and Jimmy Gutowski, were on the panel earlier, but other AP members in the room today who are providing guidance. And then a technical group that's charged with doing a lot of the analysis to support those decisions that are being made at the public level. So what are the trade-offs with how many days at sea that are allocated? What are the trade-offs with a certain number of access area trips or pursuing enhancement? And so there's different levels within the council that we all work, but it all comes together in front of those 18 voting members to make policy recommendations that are then sent to NOAA Fisheries that can be approved, rejected, or partially approved. And so there's a real synergy in our work. So Travis has been my counterpart for a long time, and so we work together to get these FMPs and changes to them implemented. So we've heard a lot about other fisheries around the world. I want to talk a little bit about the federal scallop fishery. I think a lot of the talks already have kind of chronicled where this occurs. So we're talking about the Eastern North American continental shelf in the U.S. It's from Virginia all the way up through the Gulf of Maine. Most of the harvest is coming from the Mid-Atlantic and Georges Bank, although there is a growing directed fishery in the Gulf of Maine that's managed as an individual unit. There's about 500 active vessels in this fishery, and they can look a lot different depending on the kind of permit you have, and the different trip limits that might be associated with that permit. But generally, they're broken up into larger vessels that are an offshore fleet, smaller vessels that might fish a day or two, and you have different restrictions associated with the permit class that you have. But most of these vessels are fishing dredges, either one or two, and landings have ranged between 60 million pounds and 20 million pounds, really since about 2000. So stepping into landings by region, and I think there's a couple things that I want to focus on in this chart right here that you can see on the left-hand side. For the chart itself, the blue area are landings from Georges Bank. The green area are landings from the Mid-Atlantic region. And you can see some management interventions that are happening over time. So reduction in days at sea, the implementation of rotational management, that crop rotation style that I mentioned yesterday. But the fishery has also benefited from really strong recruitment events over time. So it's not just a story of management interventions, it's also a story of natural recruitment that's really buoyed landings at different intervals over time. And so in the most recent time period, 2 exceptional year classes in 2012 on Georges Bank and 2013 in the Mid-Atlantic really moved landings up north of 60 million pounds for a couple years. And then you'll see in a few slides, we've been on a downswing. But over this time period, the Mid-Atlantic landings from that region have really dominated the total landings. And then in the more recent time period, Georges Bank is representing kind of the highest proportion of landings in recent years. And I think that's important when you layer that in with some of the oceanographic information, environmental change that we heard about earlier today. So Bobby talked about prices for different market grades of scallops. And so the 2 plots here are a different way to show that information over time. So what we're trying to show here are the different count categories or market grades. And those are represented by the different size of bubbles. And it's broken out into 2 regions, Mid-Atlantic towards the middle of the slide, and then Georges Bank on the far left-hand side. And so there's a few things to say here. One is that, as Bobby showed, larger market grades fetch a higher price at the auction or from dealers. And so, over time, I think the fishery has really tended to prefer the harvest of those animals. And so we're seeing larger market grades after the implementation of rotational management. So a feature of that is a series of years of closure followed by a reopening with the goal of improving yield. I think we've said that's been a successful program, and that's borne out in the data here. If you look at the Mid-Atlantic panel and you go down to the bottom, you can see the decline in landings overall, kind of compared to Georges Bank, and we saw that in the slide beforehand. And then I think one thing that's interesting and probably worth hearing from industry on is that in this more recent period of Georges Bank, we've seen, I think, a broader distribution of landings of different market grades. So 2030s, 1020s, and then kind of U10 or U12 size class. So with that information in mind, I wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit and talk a little bit about fishery level landings and overall revenue. And this is in 2023 dollars. My colleague Naresh put this information together. But to really think about the next 2 slides in the context of what I'll call stability. The council's been interested in this idea. It's part of our risk policy. And so stability at the fishery level sort of might mean stability in overall biomass. It could also mean stability in total landings for everyone. And so, one thing that we know isn't true is that landings are not the same every year. And so in this period from 2009 out through 2012, we have landings over 50 million pounds. The fishery reaches that again in 2017, 2018, 19, but then it's been in this stepwise decline over time. My guess is in 2024, landings will be lower than they were in 2023. And over that time period, you see price, and in this case, we're following total revenue. That's the green line. You see a spike in 2021 where prices were just tended to be higher. And so you can see some, I guess, changes in how these trends might move over time. But overall, this is, I guess, is a look in terms of the stability, fishery landings back through 2019. The other thing we think about at the council is stability at the business level or the vessel level. And so on this slide, we're showing the average revenue for a particular permit class. This is a full-time limited access permit. So these are generally larger vessels. They fish 2 dredges. And you can see that we've changed the scale of the landings, and those are shown as the orange bars. But in peak years of landings, these vessels might harvest over 150,000 pounds of scallop meats. 2023, this dips below 80,000 pounds per boat. And you can see the change in revenue as well. So revenues over $2 million, revenues approaching $2.5 million, now under $1 million per boat. And so for this kind of vessel, it's generally a 7-man crew. And so there's other things to kind of think about in terms of what these numbers might mean for individual vessels, and really just kind of thinking about kind of the stability and why you might want to pursue enhancement for this fishery, given some of these swings in revenue. The other thing I'll say, that this isn't unique to this permit class. This is true for IFQ vessels. This is probably true for vessels participating in the Northern Gulf of Maine, where the number of days have shrunk. So you do tend to see pretty large changes overall in terms of landings and revenue for all permit classes in the fishery. So Mel said earlier today, how many scallops are we talking about in terms of enhancement? And so, one of the things we wanted to share just very quickly was, how many scallops are we really talking about to achieve kind of the allocation structure that we have in the fishery right now? And so in the table here, we just wanted to show 4 different scenarios, thinking about both the IFQ component of the fishery, some of the smaller boats, but also at this trip level. Someone mentioned 6 million pounds harvested by the larger vessels. And so we're talking about a lot of scallops. I guess that's the take home here. So 250,000 pounds of an allocation, so of meat weight. You might need 2.5 million scallops. If they're all U10s, they probably won't be. So when you move out to this 25 count range, 6.2 million scallops. When you're talking about a full trip for the whole fleet, 6 million pounds landed, every boat gets to catch 18,000 pounds. We're talking closer to 100 million scallops at 15 count level. And so I think scaling is something that we're interested in the council, and kind of how to move this forward and sort of where that might fit in and how quickly things could be pursued. So to be really specific about the council process and immediate pathways forward, there's kind of 3 things I want to talk about with respect to enhancement. One is future research and the scallop RSA that's been mentioned earlier. There's an ongoing strategic planning process that I think really aligns well with introducing new ideas and new concepts potentially for the FMP. And then we have our existing fishery management plan, which can be changed, but there's also existing authority that the council has within that to open and close areas, and there's a little bit of experience there. So I'm hoping that the workshop report will inform the strategic planning process, which could inform changes to the FMP. I think that's a pretty that could be a pretty nice outcome here, but that's another way that this could work. The other thing that we're focused on too, and I'll mention this on the RSA, is that we can have research directly informing changes in the fishery management process. And so there's not necessarily one pathway to making changes to the FMP. So Mary Beth did a really nice job explaining the research set-aside program earlier on. The only thing I want to add is that the fishery is setting aside quota off the top. The proceeds from that harvest are being used to support research. But a key feature of that is that the industry is forgoing harvesting that and taking it home for themselves. And so we reduced the number of days at sea, we reduced the quota, and it's really a conscious decision by industry, supported by the council, to support this program overall. We think it's been highly successful, as Mary Beth mentioned. One thing that I think folks in this room should know is that the council's been thinking about enhancement for a while. Travis mentioned the trip in 2019. Earlier this year in June, the council approved changes that would allow enhancement-related projects to be funded for a longer time horizon. And that was really a recognition that that sort of work, those projects are often dealing with pretty novel issues. As we've talked about the past couple of days, they might need more time to really work through some of the challenges and really try to fine tune that and get things right. And so this has been a change in the program. And so now projects can be funded over a longer time horizon, which I think is a good thing. So moving on to the strategic plan that's ongoing for the council. We're hoping that the council will articulate a vision for what this fishery would look like over the next 3 to 5 years. It's probably a longer time horizon there as well. And then importantly, what are the steps to achieve that? So just a little kind of preview of how we think that might go. And we think it'll be a fairly quick process, wrapping up the end of next calendar year. But my expectation is that enhancement's going to be part of that discussion. And certainly folks who think that should be important should engage and plug into this process for the strategic plan. And then kind of the last of the pathways forward is the existing FMP. And so as I mentioned, the council has jurisdiction over scallops in federal waters. Council has jurisdiction over other fisheries in federal waters. There is an existing authority to open and close areas for scallop fishing. We've got a little bit of experience. Farrell is involved in a project right now where there's a dedicated closure to allow an enhancement project and transplanting work to go on. We've closed a small piece of an area south of Nantucket to allow research to happen there. So that is ongoing. There's experience with that approach. In terms of bigger changes to the FMP, so a new goal or an objective, changing the set aside, new permits, that's a longer process that Travis is going to speak to. And as he mentioned, deals with a lot of different laws. But I think the strategic planning process can help inform some of those next steps and some of those bigger changes.